I vanished while pregnant. My husband's mistress never expected the billionaire to collapse. The clock on the nightstand read 6:43 a.m. when I placed my wedding ring on the cold marble of the kitchen counter. 5 years of marriage reduced to a circle of platinum and diamonds sitting next to a folded piece of paper. My hands were trembling, but not from the December cold seeping through the windows of the Hamptons mansion. I was 6 months pregnant, and every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay, to try one more time, to believe that somehow the man I married would come back to me. But that man never existed. I created him in my desperate need to be loved. I looked at the note one last time, a few words that would change everything. I am gone. Please do not look for me. Our child deserves a mother who knows her own name. I touched my belly, felt my daughter kick, and walked out the front door into the freezing morning air. The town car was waiting at the end of the driveway, engine running, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. I did not look back, not once. What James Whitmore did not know, what he could never have anticipated, was that his pregnant wife had spent the last 4 months planning this moment down to the last detail. He thought he had me trapped. He thought I was broken. He was about to discover how wrong he was. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and do not forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. Now, let us continue. I met James Whitmore at a charity gala in Manhattan when I was 26 years old. He was 32, impossibly handsome, and had the kind of confidence that made everyone in the room turn to look at him when he walked in. I was there representing my family's foundation. The Carrington name meant something in Connecticut: old money, real estate holdings that spanned 3 generations, and a reputation for philanthropy that my grandmother had built from nothing. When my parents passed away in a car accident during my junior year of college, I inherited everything: the houses, the investments, the responsibility, and the loneliness. James saw that loneliness from across the ballroom. I know that now. Predators always recognize vulnerability. They can smell it the way sharks smell blood in the water. He approached me near the silent auction table, where I was pretending to be interested in a weekend getaway to Aspen. His first words to me were not hello on nice to meet you. He looked at the auction item, then at me, and said that Aspen was overrated and that if I wanted real mountains, I should let him take me to Switzerland. I laughed. I actually laughed, like it was the most charming thing anyone had ever said to me. Within 3 months, we were engaged. Within 6, we were married in a ceremony at my family's estate in Greenwich that cost more than most people make in a decade. I wore my mother's dress. James wore a smile that I now recognize as triumph. The first year was everything I had dreamed of. We traveled constantly: Paris, Tokyo, the Maldives. James was building his investment firm, and I was happy to support him. When he mentioned that he needed capital to close a major deal, I did not hesitate. I transferred $2 million from my personal account without a second thought. That was my first mistake. The second million came 6 months later, then $5 million for a commercial real estate opportunity that he promised would triple our investment, then another $8 million to buy out a partner who was causing problems. I never questioned it. I never asked to see the paperwork. I was so desperate to be a good wife, to prove that I was worthy of being loved, that I handed over my entire inheritance piece by piece. By our 3rd anniversary, James had transformed from a charming entrepreneur into something I did not recognize. The compliments stopped. The date nights disappeared. He started coming home later and later, smelling like perfume that was not mine, making excuses that became increasingly lazy. When I tried to talk to him about it, he would turn everything around on me. I was being paranoid. I was being clingy. I was being ungrateful for everything he had provided. Provided, as if the life we lived was not built on my family's money. The manipulation was so gradual that I did not notice it happening. First, he suggested that I close my personal bank account and move everything into our joint accounts, for simplicity, he said. Then he convinced me to put the Greenwich estate in both our names. Then he started managing all the household finances because I was clearly too emotional to handle money responsibly. By year 4, I did not have access to a single account. I did not have a credit card in my name. When I needed cash, I had to ask James, and he would make me explain exactly what I needed it for before deciding whether to give it to me. I had become a prisoner in my own life, and I did not even realize the bars had been built around me. The pregnancy changed everything. I found out I was expecting on a Tuesday morning in June. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor of our Hamptons house, staring at the positive test, feeling something I had not felt in years: hope. A baby, a family. Maybe this would bring James back to me. Maybe this would fix everything that had broken between us. I planned an elaborate dinner to tell him. Candles, his favorite wine, a tiny pair of baby shoes wrapped in a silver box. I practiced my speech 100 times, imagining the joy on his face, the way he would sweep me into his arms and tell me this was the best news of his life. Instead, when I handed him the box and he saw what was inside, his face went completely still. He set the shoes down on the table, took a long sip of wine, and asked me if I was sure. I told him I was. I was 8 weeks along. I had already seen the heartbeat. He nodded slowly, like I had just told him about a minor inconvenience, a scheduling conflict that would need to be resolved. Then he asked if I had considered my options. I did not understand what he meant at first. I thought he was talking about hospitals or birthing plans. But the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He did not want this baby. The argument that followed was the worst we had ever had. James told me that a child would ruin everything we had built. He said that he was not ready to be a father, that I was being selfish for making this decision without consulting him, that I was trying to trap him with his own child, using my own body. I told him that I was keeping the baby no matter what he said. Something in me finally snapped that night. Maybe it was the hormones, or maybe it was the first spark of maternal protection, but I refused to back down. James did not yell. He did not throw things. He simply looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said that if I wanted to destroy my body and my life for a child he never asked for, that was my choice, but I should not expect him to participate in my delusion. He slept in the guest room that night, and the night after, and every night for the next 4 months. The second trimester should have been a time of joy. I should have been decorating a nursery, picking out names, feeling my baby kick for the first time while my husband held his hand against my belly in wonder. Instead, I spent those months discovering exactly how trapped I really was. It started with small things. James canceled my hair appointment because he said I was spending too much money on vanity. He told our housekeeper to stop buying the prenatal vitamins I preferred because the generic brand was just as good. He removed my name from the approved list at the country club because he did not want me embarrassing him by showing up pregnant at social events. Then the small things became big things. I tried to book a flight to visit my Aunt Eleanor in Vermont for Thanksgiving. When I called the airline, they told me my credit card had been declined. I tried another card. Declined. I called the bank and they informed me that I was not authorized to access the accounts. James had removed my name from everything. When I confronted him, he did not even bother to lie. He told me that, given my emotional state, he actually used those words, my emotional state. He had decided it was best if he managed our finances exclusively until after the baby was born. He said it was for my own protection. He said he was worried about my mental health. I asked him how I was supposed to buy anything. Groceries, clothes for my changing body, things for the baby. He smiled at me then, the same smile he had worn on our wedding day, and told me that all I had to do was ask him. He would take care of everything. He would take care of me. The message was clear. I was no longer his wife. I was his possession. The isolation came next. James insisted that I stop seeing my friends because they were filling my head with negative thoughts about him. He hired a driver to take me to doctor appointments, but the driver reported back to James on everywhere I went and everyone I spoke to. He had the locks changed on the house and did not give me a key, so I could not leave unless someone let me out. I was a prisoner in a $15 million mansion, and no one on the outside had any idea. It was during this time that I discovered Vanessa Pohl. I found an earring in James's jacket pocket when I was taking his suits to the dry cleaner, one of the few tasks I was still allowed to do. It was a delicate gold hoop with a small diamond, far more tasteful than anything I would have chosen. I recognized it immediately because I had seen it before. Vanessa Cole was an architect who had designed the renovation of our pool house the previous summer. She was 30 years old, ambitious, and stunning in that effortless way that made me feel like a frumpy housewife even before I was pregnant. James had insisted on working closely with her on the project, and I had thought nothing of it at the time. Now, I thought everything of it. I started paying attention. The late nights at the office, the business trips that seemed to happen every other weekend, the way he would step outside to take certain phone calls, the smell of perfume on his collar that I had been too naive or too desperate to question. James was not just having an affair. Based on the dates in his calendar and the receipts I found hidden in his home office, he had been seeing Vanessa for over a year. He had taken her to Paris, to the Maldives, to all the places he had once taken me. He had bought her jewelry and clothes and a car, all with my money. The betrayal should have destroyed me. In some ways, it did. I spent 3 days in bed, crying so hard I was afraid I would hurt the baby. I barely ate, I barely slept. I played every moment of our marriage over in my head, searching for the signs I had missed, the warnings I had ignored. But somewhere in that darkness, something else emerged. Not sadness, not rage, clarity. James thought I was weak. He thought I was broken. He thought he had stripped away everything that made me who I was until there was nothing left but a shell who would do whatever he said. He was wrong. I started to plan. It began with small acts of rebellion. I memorized the code to James's home office by watching him enter it in the reflection of a window. I took photographs of financial documents with an old phone I found in a drawer and hid in my underwear. I wrote down every account number, every password, every piece of information that might be useful. Then I reached out to my Aunt Eleanor. Aunt Eleanor was my mother's sister, the black sheep of the family who had rejected the Carrington fortune to live a simple life in a small town in Vermont. She ran a bed and breakfast, grew her own vegetables, and had never once apologized for choosing happiness over wealth. My parents had disapproved of her choices, but I had always admired her quiet strength. I called her from a burner phone I bought at a gas station during a prenatal appointment, hiding in the bathroom while my driver waited outside. She answered on the first ring. I told her everything. The money, the control, the affair, the pregnancy, the prison I was living in. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Aunt Eleanor said 5 words that changed my life. She told me to come home. Over the next 3 months, I prepared my escape with military precision. I hired a divorce attorney in secret, paying him with a watch I had pawned from my grandmother's jewelry collection, the one thing James had not taken from me. I gathered evidence of James's financial misconduct, his affairs, his systematic abuse. I documented everything in a safe deposit box that my attorney opens in my name alone. The property James believed was jointly owned was not. My grandmother had been a shrewd woman, and the trust she had established was ironclad. The Greenwich estate, the investment accounts, even the Hamptons house, all of it was still legally mine. James had convinced me to sign papers that he claimed made everything joint, but those papers had never been filed. He had forged my signature on documents that did not exist in any legal database. He thought he had stolen everything from me. In reality, he had stolen nothing. I set my exit date for December 20th, 5 days before Christmas, 4 days before James's elaborate birthday party at the mansion, where he planned to unveil a new business venture and solidify his status among the Manhattan elite. What he did not know was that there would be no party. There would be no unveiling. There would be nothing but an empty house and a diamond ring on a marble counter. The final confrontation came 10 days before I left. James had given me the guest list for his birthday celebration, instructing me to review it and make sure the caterers had the correct dietary requirements for each attendee. I was scrolling through the names when I saw it. Vanessa Cole, Table 3, seated directly across from where James would be giving his speech. He was not even trying to hide it anymore. He was going to parade his mistress in front of me in my own home at a party I was expected to hostess with a smile on my face. Something inside me broke. I found James in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, looking out at the snow falling over the gardens. I threw the guest list at him and asked him if he thought I was stupid. He turned slowly, his expression somewhere between amusement and annoyance, and told me that he did not know what I was talking about. I told him I knew about Vanessa. I knew about all of them. I knew about the trips and the jewelry and the lies. I told him that if he thought I was going to stand in that ballroom and smile while his mistress watched from 3 tables away, he had lost his mind. James set down his whiskey. He walked toward me slowly, deliberately, the way a predator approaches wounded prey. When he was close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath, he told me that I was going to do exactly what I was told. He said that I was going to smile and wave and play the perfect wife because that was the only thing I was good for. He said that without him, I was nothing. He said I had no money, no friends, no future. He told me I was stuck with him forever and I had better learn to accept it. I asked him if he was sure about that. Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt. Just for a moment. I told him to enjoy his party. Then I walked out of the room and started counting down the days. The morning I left, the temperature was 17 degrees, the kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe. I had been awake since 4 a.m., lying in the darkness of the guest room where I had slept for the past 5 months, feeling my daughter move inside me. She was restless, as if she knew something was about to change. I told her that it was going to be okay. I told her that I was going to give her a better life than this. I told her that she would never know what it felt like to be small, to be invisible, to be someone's property. At 6:30, I got out of bed. I had already packed everything I needed: 1 suitcase of clothes, my documents, the burner phone, and the folder of evidence I had gathered over the past months. Everything else I was leaving behind: the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry, the life I had tried so hard to make work. None of it was worth anything if it cost me my soul. I walked downstairs in the silence of the empty house. James had left 2 days earlier for a business trip to Miami, which I knew meant a romantic getaway with Vanessa. He would not be back until the following afternoon, December 21st. By then, I would be long gone. I placed my wedding ring on the kitchen counter, 5 carats of flawless diamond, custom designed by James himself. He had presented it to me on the night he proposed, telling me it represented the life we would build together. Now it represented everything I was leaving behind. I wrote the note quickly. I had rehearsed them 1,000 times in my head, but writing them still felt like tearing something out of my chest. I am gone. Please do not look for me. Our child deserves a mother who knows her own name. At 6:43, I walked out the front door. The town car was waiting, arranged by my attorney through a service James did not know existed. The driver took my suitcase without a word and opened the back door. I looked at the mansion one last time. The house I had bought with my inheritance, the prison James had built around me, the tomb where Layla Carrington had been slowly dying for 5 years. I got in the car and never looked back. The drive to Vermont took 6 hours. 6 hours of watching the landscape change from the manicured wealth of the Hamptons to the raw, honest beauty of New England. 6 hours of feeling the knot in my chest slowly begin to loosen. By the time we reached Aunt Eleanor's bed and breakfast in Woodstock, I was crying, not from sadness, but from relief, from the overwhelming sensation of being free. Aunt Eleanor was waiting on the porch when we pulled up. She was 72 years old, with silver hair and the kind of face that had earned every line through years of laughter and living. When I got out of the car, she did not say anything. She just opened her arms. I collapsed into them and sobbed. She held me for a long time, rubbing my back, telling me I was safe, telling me I was home. Then she took my hand and led me inside, where a fire was burning and a pot of soup was warming on the stove. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I could breathe. James discovered I was gone at 3:47 p.m. on December 21st. He called me 14 times between that moment and midnight. I know because I watched each call come in on my burner phone, which I had deliberately left active so I could monitor his reaction. The voicemails started calm. He told me that whatever was wrong, we could fix it. He told me to come home so we could talk. By the 8th voicemail, he was screaming. He demanded to know where I was. He threatened to call the police. He said I was mentally unstable, that I was a danger to myself and the baby, that he would have me committed if I did not answer him immediately. The 10th voicemail was different. His voice was shaking. He said he did not understand what was happening. He asked me why I would do this to him. He said he loved me. I deleted that one without listening to the end. What I learned later, from mutual acquaintances who took great pleasure in sharing the gossip, was that James had returned from Miami with Vanessa still on his arm. They had pulled into the driveway of the mansion, laughing about something, planning to spend the afternoon preparing for the party. Then James found the ring and the note. He read those 11 words and something in him broke. Vanessa tried to comfort him. She told him that this was actually good news. She said that I had clearly lost my mind, and now he was free to be with her without any complications. She suggested they use the party as an opportunity to announce the relationship officially. James looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Then he told her to get out. According to the housekeeper who witnessed the whole thing, James spent the next 3 hours alone in the mansion, calling everyone he could think of who might know where I had gone, my friends who I had not spoken to in over a year, my former colleagues who had no idea I even existed anymore. Everyone he contacted gave him the same answer. They did not know, they could not help. He did not think to call Aunt Eleanor. He had never met her. I had made sure of that. The birthday party happened 4 days later, though party was a generous word for what actually took place. Half the guests canceled when they heard I had left. The other half showed up out of morbid curiosity, wanting to witness the downfall of James Whitmore firsthand. James spent the evening drinking too much and telling anyone who would listen that his wife was having a mental breakdown, that he was worried about her and the baby, that he was doing everything in his power to find her and bring her home safely. No one believed him, because here's the thing about building your reputation on charm and lies. Eventually, the mask slips, and when it does, everyone who ever doubted you feels validated. By the end of the night, James was sitting alone at a table meant for 20, surrounded by empty chairs and half-eaten appetizers, staring at his phone and waiting for a call that would never come. Vanessa was not there. She had already moved on to her next target. The first weeks in Vermont were the hardest of my life. I thought that leaving would feel like freedom, and in some ways it did. But freedom is terrifying when you have spent 5 years forgetting who you are. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that James had found me. I would reach for my phone to check if he had called, then remember that I had thrown that phone into a river somewhere in Connecticut. I would walk to the window of the guest room Aunt Eleanor had prepared for me and stare out at the snow-covered mountains, trying to convince myself that this was real, that I had actually done it, that I was safe. Some nights I could not convince myself. Some nights I just sat in the dark and cried. Aunt Eleanor never pushed me to talk. She would bring me tea in the mornings and sit with me by the fire in the evenings, telling me stories about my mother when she was young, about the summers they spent together before money and expectations drove them apart. She would cook meals that reminded me of childhood, before everything became complicated, before I learned that love could be a weapon. Slowly, I started to remember who I was before James. I remembered that I used to paint, watercolors mostly, landscapes and flowers and abstract shapes that meant nothing to anyone but me. Aunt Eleanor found some old supplies in her attic and set them up in a corner of the sunroom where the light was best. I would sit there for hours, brush in hand, watching colors bleed into each other on the paper. I was not good at it. I had never been good at it. But that was not the point. The point was that I was doing something for myself, something that had no purpose except to make me happy. I had forgotten what that felt like. As my belly grew larger, I started to venture out into the town. Woodstock was everything the Hamptons were not, small and genuine and unpretentious. The shop owners learned my name. The regulars at the local cafe saved me a seat by the window. The librarian recommended books based on what I had checked out the week before. No one asked where I came from or why I was there. They just accepted me as Eleanor's niece, the pregnant woman who was staying for a while. In a world that had made me feel invisible for so long, being seen, really seen, felt like a miracle. I started therapy in February, 3 weeks before my due date. Aunt Eleanor drove me to Burlington every Wednesday to see a counselor who specialized in survivors of emotional abuse. I hated that word at first, survivor. It felt too dramatic for what I had experienced. James never hit me, he never raised his hand. But my therapist helped me understand that abuse does not always leave bruises. Sometimes it leaves something worse. Sometimes it leaves you believing that you deserve to be treated like nothing. I talked about the money, the isolation, the way James had systematically dismantled my sense of self until I could not make a decision without his approval. I talked about the pregnancy and how I had hoped it would save my marriage, and how devastating it was to realize that nothing could save something that was never real. I cried a lot in those sessions, but I also started to heal. My daughter was born on March 15th at 2:23 in the morning. She came into the world screaming, and I have never heard a more beautiful sound. The labor was long, 18 hours of contractions that felt like my body was being torn apart from the inside. Aunt Eleanor stayed with me the entire time, holding my hand, reminding me to breathe, telling me that I was stronger than I knew. When the doctor finally placed my daughter on my chest, I looked at her tiny face and felt something shift inside me. All the pain of the past 5 years, all the fear and doubt and self-hatred, it did not disappear, but it became smaller, less important, because this little person was here now, and she needed me to be whole. I named her Hope, because that is what she was. Hope that the future could be different. Hope that the cycle of pain and control could end. He was prohibited from contacting me directly, from coming within 500 feet of Aunt Eleanor's property, and from making any public statements about my mental health. It was not a victory, not yet, but it was a start. Over the following months, the case grew more complicated. James hired new lawyers, expensive ones, the kind who bill by the minute and wear suits that cost more than most people's cars. He filed counter motions and appeals and requests for delays. He gave interviews to tabloid reporters, painting himself as a devoted husband who had been blindsided by his wife's sudden abandonment. Some people believed him. Some people always believe the charming man over the quiet woman. But more and more, the truth started to come out. Former investors came forward with their own stories of being cheated. Business partners filed lawsuits. The SEC opened an investigation into James's firm. The empire he had built on lies was starting to crumble. In August, 6 months after Hope was born, James's lawyers requested a meeting. They wanted to discuss a settlement. James was willing to grant me a divorce, give up any claim to my family's assets, and relinquish parental rights to Hope, in exchange for me dropping the fraud charges and agreeing to a confidentiality clause that would prevent me from speaking publicly about our marriage. My attorney asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about the satisfaction of watching James face justice for everything he had done. I thought about the years of legal battles that still lay ahead, the depositions and hearings and appeals that would keep me tied to him indefinitely. Then I thought about hope, about the life I was building in Vermont, about the peace I had finally started to find. I told my attorney to take the deal. Some people might call that letting him win. Maybe they are right. But I had already won the only thing that mattered. I had my daughter, I had my freedom, I had a future that did not include James Whitmore. Everything else was just noise. The divorce was finalized on September 3rd. I signed the papers at my attorney's office in Burlington while Hope napped in her carrier beside me. When I put down the pen, I felt lighter than I had in years. James did not attend the signing. His lawyers handled everything on his behalf. I heard later that he was in the middle of defending himself against 3 separate lawsuits and did not have time for something as trivial as officially ending our marriage. The settlement gave me everything I had asked for: full ownership of the Greenwich estate, which I immediately put on the market, control of my family's trusts, which James had never actually managed to touch despite his best efforts, and sole custody of Hope, with no visitation rights for James unless I explicitly approved them. I never approved them. The house in Greenwich sold within 2 months for $12 million. I used part of the money to pay off my legal fees and set up a college fund for Hope. The rest I invested conservatively, determined to protect my daughter's future the way my grandmother had tried to protect mine. James, meanwhile, was falling apart. Without access to my family's money, his house of cards collapsed almost immediately. The investment firm declared bankruptcy in October. The Hamptons mansion was seized by creditors in November. By December, exactly 1 year after I had walked out the door, James Whitmore had lost everything. I heard the news from a mutual acquaintance who could not wait to share the gossip. James was living in a rental apartment in New Jersey, working as a sales representative for a mid-tier real estate company. His fancy suits had been replaced by off-the-rack blazers. His sports cars had been repossessed. His social circle had evaporated the moment they realized he could no longer afford to pick up the check. Vanessa Cole was long gone, of course. She had moved to Los Angeles within weeks of the scandal breaking, presumably in search of a new, wealthy man to attach herself to. I wondered sometimes if she ever thought about what she had done, if she ever felt guilty for being part of destroying someone's marriage. Probably not. People like Vanessa and James do not feel guilt. They only feel inconvenience. I wish I could say that hearing about James's downfall brought me satisfaction. Some days it did. Some days I thought about all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, all the times he had made me feel worthless. And I felt a grim pleasure in knowing that karma had finally caught up with him. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of thinking about him, tired of letting him take up space in my head, tired of being the woman who used to be married to James Whitmore. I wanted to be someone new, someone defined by her own choices, not by the man who had tried to destroy her. So I stopped following the news about James. I stopped asking mutual friends for updates. I stopped caring what happened to him. And slowly, day by day, I started to forget. I met Thomas Brennan on a Tuesday afternoon in June, 14 months after I had left James. I was in Burlington for a meeting with my financial advisor, discussing long-term investment strategies for Hope's college fund. She was almost 15 months old by then, a toddler who was just starting to walk and had recently discovered the joy of saying no to everything. I had brought her with me because Aunt Eleanor was visiting friends in Boston. The meeting ran long, and by the time we finished, Hope was fussy and hungry and desperately in need of a nap. I ducked into a coffee shop near the waterfront, hoping to grab something quick before the drive back to Woodstock. The place was crowded, and the only available seat was at a communal table near the window. I was trying to wrestle Hope into a high chair while simultaneously ordering a latte when a voice beside me asked if I needed help. I looked up and saw a man about my age, maybe a little older, with kind brown eyes and the sort of face that looked like it smiled a lot. He was already standing, reaching for the high chair with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. I told him that I was fine, that I could handle it, but Hope chose that exact moment to throw her sippy cup across the room, and the man caught it one-handed without even looking. He handed it back to me with a grin and said that it seemed like I had everything under control. I laughed. I could not help it. It was the first time I had genuinely laughed in front of a stranger in longer than I could remember. His name was Thomas Brennan. He was 41 years old, originally from Boston, and had lived in Vermont for the past decade. He owned a sustainable timber company that supplied wood to furniture makers and builders throughout New England. He had never been married. He had no children of his own, but he had 3 nieces and 2 nephews who had taught him everything he needed to know about sippy cups and high chairs. We talked for over an hour about his work, which he was clearly passionate about Vermont, which he loved with the intensity of a convert, about Hope, who had fallen asleep in her high chair with crackers in both fists. He asked me what had brought me to the area. I gave him the simplified version: bad marriage, fresh start, learning to be a single mom. He nodded like he understood, and he did not push for details. When I finally got up to leave, he asked if he could give me his number, not in a pushy way. He simply said that he had enjoyed talking to me, and if I ever found myself in Burlington again, he would love to buy me a proper coffee. I hesitated. The last time I had trusted a charming man, I had nearly lost everything. But something about Thomas felt different. There was no calculation in his eyes, no performance in his smile. He was just a man in a coffee shop, asking for a chance to see me again. I gave him my number instead. I told him that if he wanted to buy me coffee, he could drive to Woodstock. He called the next day. Our first real date happened 2 weeks later. Thomas drove the 45 minutes from Burlington to Woodstock on a Saturday afternoon, arriving with a picnic basket and a blanket and a nervous energy that made him seem almost boyish. We went to a spot by the river that Aunt Eleanor had shown me, a quiet clearing where the water was shallow enough for Hope to splash in while we talked. Thomas had packed sandwiches from a local deli and a bottle of sparkling cider because he had remembered me mentioning that I was not much of a drinker. He had remembered. Such a small thing, but it meant everything. We talked for hours about his family. His parents still lived in Boston. His sister was the one with all the kids. He visited them every few months, but had never felt the pull to move back. About my family, my parents, my grandmother, Aunt Eleanor, the complicated legacy of the Carrington name. I told him more than I had planned to. About James, about the abuse, about the escape. I kept waiting for him to look at me differently, to see me as damaged or complicated or too much work. Instead, he just listened. And when I finished, he said that I seemed like someone who had been through a lot and come out stronger. No one had ever described me as strong before. The second date was dinner at a farm-to-table restaurant in Woodstock. The third was a hike in the mountains with Hope strapped to Thomas's back because he insisted on giving my arms a break. The fourth was a movie night at Aunt Eleanor's house, where she grilled Thomas for 3 hours about his intentions and his family and his views on everything, from politics to proper pie crust. He passed every test. We took things slowly. I needed to. The scars from my marriage were still fresh, and I was terrified of making the same mistakes again. Thomas understood. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give. He let me set the pace, and he matched it step for step. 6 months after our first coffee shop meeting, he told me he loved me. We were sitting on Aunt Eleanor's porch, watching the first snow of the season fall over the garden. Hope was asleep inside, and the world was quiet and white and perfect. I said it back, and I meant it in a way I had never meant it before. Thomas proposed on the 1-year anniversary of our first date. We were back at the same spot by the river, though this time Hope was old enough to run through the grass while we sat on the blanket and watched. The picnic basket was there, the sparkling cider, all the same elements as that first afternoon. But this time, there was also a small velvet box hidden in Thomas's jacket pocket. He did not get down on one knee. He just took my hand and told me that the past year had been the happiest of his life. He said that he loved me and he loved Hope, and he wanted to spend whatever time he had left on this earth building a family with us. Then he opened the box and asked if I would marry him. The ring was simple, a single diamond on a gold band, nothing like the ostentatious rock James had given me. Thomas said he had chosen it because it reminded him of me, elegant and understated, and more beautiful than anything flashy could ever be. I said yes before he finished talking. We got married that September in Aunt Eleanor's garden. 50 guests, most of them people I had met in the 2.5 years since I had arrived in Vermont. Homemade food prepared by neighbors who had become friends. Wildflowers from the fields behind the bed and breakfast. Hope was the flower girl. She was almost 3 by then, old enough to toddle down the aisle with a basket of petals that she mostly threw at herself. She called Thomas Daddy by then, had been calling him that for months, and watching her reach for his hand as he lifted her into his arms at the altar was the moment I finally understood what family was supposed to feel like. This is what it was supposed to feel like. Aunt Eleanor cried through the entire ceremony. So did I. So did Thomas, though he pretended it was allergies. The reception lasted until midnight. There was dancing and laughter and speeches that made me blush. There was cake that Hope got more on her face than in her mouth. There was my aunt putting me aside to tell me that my mother would have been proud. I believed her. Thomas officially adopted Hope 6 months after the wedding. The paperwork was straightforward since James had relinquished all parental rights in the divorce settlement. A judge in Burlington signed the documents on a Tuesday morning, and just like that, Hope Brennan became real. She has no memory of James. She never will if I have anything to say about it. As far as she knows, Thomas is her father, has always been her father, will always be her father, and in every way that matters, that is true. James requested visitation rights once, about 2 years after the divorce was finalized. His lawyers sent a formal petition arguing that he had a right to know his biological daughter, that he had made mistakes but deserved a second chance. My lawyer sent back a detailed account of his history, the financial abuse, the emotional manipulation, the complete lack of interest in Hope during the first 18 months of her life, the fact that he had not attempted to contact either of us in over 2 years until suddenly deciding he wanted to play father. The petition was withdrawn within a week. James never tried again. I heard through the grapevine that he got remarried a few years later. Some woman he met at his real estate job, younger than me, presumably unaware of his history. I wondered sometimes if I should warn her, if I should try to save her from the same fate I had barely escaped. But then I decided that it was not my responsibility. I had spent too many years carrying the weight of other people's choices. I was done. We bought the farmhouse the summer after we got married. Thomas found it on a drive through the countryside, a for sale sign half hidden by overgrown bushes at the end of a long dirt road. The house itself was a disaster, roof leaking, porch sagging, kitchen that had not been updated since the 1970s. But the land was beautiful. 20 acres of rolling hills and old-growth forest, and a creek that ran along the eastern edge of the property. Thomas looked at the falling-down house and saw potential. I looked at the land and saw home. We spent 2 years renovating. Thomas did most of the work himself, with help from his employees and some local contractors. I learned to use power tools, to read blueprints, to make decisions about things like cabinet hardware and bathroom tiles. It felt ridiculous sometimes, caring about grout colors when I had once lived in a mansion with 12 bathrooms. But it also felt right. This was ours. Every nail we hammered, every wall we painted, every floor we refinished, it was all ours, not inherited, not stolen, built with our own hands and our own money and our own love. We moved in on Hope's 4th birthday. She picked her bedroom herself, the one at the top of the stairs with the window that looked out over the garden. Thomas built her a canopy bed and painted butterflies on the walls. I sewed curtains from fabric she chose at the craft store, pink and purple and completely impractical. It was perfect. I am writing this from the porch of that house, 5 years after we bought it. Hope is 8 now. She starts third grade next week. She loves books and butterflies and asking questions I do not know how to answer. She wants to be a veterinarian or a princess, or maybe both. She has Thomas's patience and my stubbornness, and she thinks the world is a place where good things happen to good people. I hope I never have to teach her otherwise. Thomas is in the garden, building a treehouse that Hope has been requesting for months. He has been working on it every weekend since June, and he swears it will be finished before the first snow. I have my doubts, but I have learned not to bet against him. Aunt Eleanor passed away last spring, peacefully in her sleep at 81 years old. She left me the bed and breakfast, which I have kept running with help from a local family who needed the work. I go there sometimes when I need to remember where I came from and how far I have traveled. I think about her every day, about the phone call that saved my life, about the 5 words that changed everything. Come home. I used to think that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant disappearing into someone else's needs, that my worth was determined by how small I could make myself to fit into another person's life. I was wrong. Love is not supposed to shrink you. It is supposed to help you grow. James Whitmore tried to make me small. He tried to erase me, to reduce me to nothing more than an accessory to his ambition. For 5 years, I let him. I gave away my money, my independence, my sense of self. I became a ghost in my own life, haunting the halls of a mansion that was supposed to be my home. But ghosts can come back to life. I'm proof of that. If you are reading this, if you are trapped in your own golden cage, if you think there is no way out because he controls the money or the keys or your sense of self, I want you to know something. There is always a way. It might take months of planning. It might take help from people you forgot existed. It might take leaving behind everything you thought you wanted in order to find everything you actually need. But you can do it. I know because I did. I walked out of a $15 million prison with nothing but a suitcase and a baby in my belly. I rebuilt my life in a town where no one knew my name. I found love again when I thought I was too broken to be loved. And now I am sitting on my porch, watching my daughter chase fireflies in the garden, feeling my husband's hand on my shoulder as he brings me a cup of tea. This is what freedom feels like. It was worth every terrifying step. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories. See you next time.